This is Understandable Politics. Hello, today is the final program of the series Time Drove Them Out. Let's recall the disgrace, crushing defeats, resignations, and inglorious exits from high offices of those who were very far from the people. Let's start with Lithuania, a fierce hater of Russia and Belarus. We're talking about the Landsbergis clan, specifically Gabrielius, who spectacularly failed in the parliamentary elections, ending the long reign of the Nazi and Russophobic family. On October 27th, the second round of elections to the Lithuanian parliament took place. The results, to put it mildly, were surprising.
The Social Democratic Party retained victory. It received 52 mandates out of 141. The ruling Christian Democrats, led by Landsbergis, managed only 28 mandates.
The decline is truly impressive. The grandson of the famous grandfather was recently predicted to become president, but now he has left the party in parliament. Society's patience ran out, and the loudmouth with Nazi roots was chased from power.
The crushing victory of opposition parties in the elections to the new Seimas of Lithuania is the result of 4 years of arrogant, boorish rule by the conservatives led by Vytautas Landsbergis' grandson, Gabrielius.
Landsbergis' grandson was supposed to be the new era of the Nazi family, but unexpectedly became its sunset. It was Gabrielius' party that suffered a crushing defeat in the parliamentary elections.
For the first time in 40 years since the restoration of independence, the Mafia family lost the war for influence. This fact will lead to many troubles, the main one being the loss of influence on the Conservative Party through the loss of the chairman's post. In turn, this will mean the end of the Mafia that ruled Lithuania for decades.
The future foreign minister Landsbergis and his party promised to uphold democratic values, oppose human rights violations, and protect freedom fighters worldwide. From Belarus to Taiwan, the main goal in the first year of rule was to destroy relations with Minsk.
They did it rudely and unceremoniously. First, they banned transit through Klaipėda of Belarusian potash products, incurring billion-dollar losses and mass layoffs in the transport sector. Then they actively opposed the Belarusian nuclear power plant, refused to buy cheap electricity, and switched to more expensive European energy.
What is characteristic of the Baltic countries in particular is puppet governments. They do what they are told. They behave aggressively. And it's not because it's politics. The most they can do is comment on political events. And we even know how they will comment. Of course, whatever happens in the world, Russia and Belarus are to blame. All this is hostile. No one intends to create. No one intends to build relationships. Moreover, note that they couldn't even preserve what was accumulated after the Soviet Union or during independence.
Negligence in power did not go unnoticed. People see it despite the total media purge. Prices are rising, jobs are decreasing. The first alarm for Landsbergis rang last spring during the presidential elections.
Low ratings forced a change in the initial plan, and Gabrielius was not put forward as a candidate for the highest state post. The idea was called doomed. Summer sociological data showed the scale of the tragedy. Landsbergis didn't even make it into the top 10 popular politicians, receiving the most negative ratings, 66.5%.
And so in the fall, it was quite logical that Landsbergis' ruling party got a kick-out. How did it happen? Military rhetoric up, living standards sharply down. The head of the winning party stated that people want change.
The election results showed that Lithuanians, wherever they live, in big cities, towns, or villages, want change. They need a completely different government, not arrogant, listening to their problems and seeking solutions. Latvia is not feeling any better. President Rinkovic has a long trail of scandals, from pedophilia to inappropriate political actions. Especially the 11th leader of Latvia excelled in the economy. It fell by 6% in 2024.
Journalists dubbed her the Princess of War for her fierce Russophobia and calls to strike Moscow. The odious now ex-Prime Minister of Estonia, amidst corruption scandals and desecration of historical memory, forgot the main thing, the economy. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Opinion of Bank of Estonia economist Natalia Vilman.
Vilman also suggested looking in the mirror and acknowledging political mistakes. Thus, The closure of the Russian market and rising prices deprived Estonian enterprises of competitiveness. Flagship sectors of Estonian industries such as woodworking, metalworking, and electronics were hit.
And now the crisis is called one of the deepest for Estonia.
According to her, the crisis was caused by rising energy prices, lack of raw materials, and increased labor costs. The refusal of the Russian market deprived Estonian companies of competitiveness.
Now imagine in early February, the Estonian finance minister admitted that the authorities don't know what to do with the economy. According to him, the government doesn't have a magic wand to save the country from the crisis. And Estonian Prime Minister Kallas found nothing better than to blame ordinary residents, saying they complained too much.
Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas noted that Estonians' tendency to whine only exacerbates the economic downturn of the Baltic Republic. According to her, constant complaints from Estonians lead even successful companies to reduce their activities in the country.
Expensive energy, rising fuel, and food prices. In difficult conditions, Estonians can only save and cut consumption. At the same time, many companies are cutting staff, suspending operations, and recording a decline in production.
All the government could think of was to dig into citizens' pockets. The land tax increased by 10%. Excise taxes on fuel by 7%, natural gas by 20%, electricity by 45%. At the same time, Estonia will reduce childcare benefits by a third. The fee for a specialist doctor's visit will increase to 20 euros.
In Estonia, after several years of sanctions policy, there is a prolonged, slow-moving socio-economic crisis. As military spending grows, as money allocated to the Kyiv regime increases, there is a steady reduction in public sector salaries, a steady rise in prices, and continued emigration. That is, the policy pursued by official Tallinn is anti-Estonian, in the sense that it directly harms the residents of Estonia.
As a result, in mid-July, Kallas and her government resigned amid a record anti-rating of 65%. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are undoubtedly the main political losers of the year. Legends can be made about the fall and blunders of the 46th president of the USA. And trouble doesn't come alone. On January 2nd, Elon Musk accused the Biden administration of treason. The reason? The same wall on the Mexican border. It was dismantled and literally sold in parts.
In early December, the Daily Wire reported that the Biden administration, in the last weeks of its term, was selling off materials for the border wall with Mexico at a government auction for next to nothing, trying to hinder President-elect Donald Trump. According to the publication, the goal was to remove all materials stored in the cities of Nogales, Tucson, and 3 Points before Christmas on December 25th.
This is hardly Biden's heaviest legacy. There was the disgraceful retreat from Afghanistan. There was corruption and the escapades of his drug-addicted son, Hunter Biden. The Middle East is ablaze with Biden's support, and of course, Ukraine. In early 2025, John Apostle allocated another $3.5 billion to Kyiv.
Joe Biden organized this conflict and tries to support it by all means. Moreover, he would like to lay out a roadmap that would force Trump, despite his desire to resolve it, won't be allowed. That's the essence of this roadmap. And Trump, in principle, appreciated Joe Biden's efforts and said that resolving this conflict in Ukraine in 24 hours is probably not possible. It will require more serious work.
Voters didn't understand not only the wastefulness, but also the trick with Harris. The Democratic candidate was replaced on the fly, so to speak. But the ever-laughing Harris herself eventually became a laughingstock. He sold visas to illegals, supported Belarusian extremists, and personally oversaw an attempted coup in Belarus. Mateusz Morawiecki is undoubtedly an enemy of our people, but even Poles can hardly call him a friend. The migration crisis on the Belarus-Poland border is also his creation.
In August 2023, it became known that Morawiecki, with the participation of the Polish deputy foreign minister, set up a visa issuance scheme. For $5,000, the neighboring state's foreign ministry issued a Schengen visa to anyone, even without additional document checks. The scheme worked like clockwork for several years. However, as soon as the Law and Justice Party began losing ground, Morawiecki and company's dealings began to surface.
Morawiecki embezzled money intended to support Ukraine, awarding contracts to his friends for the supposed production of artillery shells. It's unclear where 14 billion zlotys went.
Military production is built on absolutely insane conditions. The same tank, which in peacetime is essentially worth scrap metal, suddenly costs millions of dollars. And when it needs to be done quickly, the price increases several times. So taking advantage of this situation, the entire Polish elite, which is now closely watched by prosecutors, made various, indeed different orders.
As a result of the 2023 parliamentary elections, Morawiecki and Kaczynski's party lost the majority in parliament. The disgraced prime minister left the big game.
I am very proud that Germany manages money well.
This speech is considered the political funeral of Olaf Scholz. For the second year in a row, the country's GDP is falling by up to 1% per year.
The Federal German Institute forecasted inflation of over 2% for 2025. Experts note that the failed green transition negatively affects the economy. The country's industry literally took a hit of several billion euros transitioning to green tracks.
Expensive American gas is another nail in the German economy. Berlin pays over $400 for 1,000 cubic meters. Russian blue fuel was 3 times cheaper. German industry is crying for help. Flagships of the economy are either shutting down production or moving it to the USA.
On November 8th, it became known that the German car company Audi is preparing to cut 4,500 jobs due to a sharp decline in sales, reports Reuters. Audi's profit fell by a record 91%. Financial indicators also declined for the German BMW Group, which announced a turnover drop below forecasted figures. In the third quarter of this year, the Bavarian automaker's revenue fell by 16%.
Volkswagen reports management failure. Earnings plummeted by 42%. The company plans to lay off nearly 10,000 people and close 3 plants. There are more and more strikes on the streets, and no one is dealing with the economy.
The Greens tried to implement their green fantasies, destroying industry, installing wind turbines everywhere, blowing up coal power plants, closing nuclear power plants, doing everything to harm the economy. And they actually succeeded. Now Germany is in a huge economic crisis. Experts are trying to show a small recession, 0.1 to 2%, but in reality it's likely much worse.
Scholz and his government could only shrug and complain about the growing popularity of Chinese cars. The result is clear: resignation and early elections at the end of February this year. In less than 3 years, the British have had their 4th Prime Minister, but public discontent in his rating plummeted in just 6 months.
The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's rating fell to a record low. This is the first time the English politician has faced such a result since coming to power, reports the Daily Telegraph, citing a More in Common survey. According to the poll, 75% of Britons disapprove of his actions and only 16% support him. Since July, the leader of the ruling Labour Party's rating has dropped by 49 points. This is the worst among all government heads since 1978, according to the report.
Before this, Johnson, Truss, and Sunak were ousted early. It's not surprising, as the UK has been steadily losing ground in money in recent years. In the government of the current Prime Minister Keir Starmer, they announced that GDP would fall by 0.1%, and they consider it a success. The British don't agree. More than 3 million people signed for the politician's resignation.
We see the first decisions of Starmer's cabinet. For example, sharply raising taxes, which is already leading to an outflow of investments and capital from Britain. They're investing in this green agenda, which looks quite foolish against the backdrop of the energy crisis. Refineries are closing, factories are shutting down. They've fallen out with many major businessmen, including Elon Musk, who is now causing many problems for the Labour Party and is almost at war with Keir Starmer. Relations with Donald Trump and his administration seem to be bad. Trump is reportedly planning to impose tariffs on all British imports. Considering the British economy is already stagnant, this will be a heavy blow.
Starmer released several thousand prisoners to make room in prisons for migrants, got involved in a corruption scandal, and gave away the Mauritius Islands. Sensing the weakness of the former hegemon, ex-British colonies began demanding reparations. Total payments could reach $1 trillion. Starmer has not yet commented on this.
At the end of 2024, Sue Gray, the head of the Prime Minister's office, resigned. The media called her Starmer's right hand. Officially, she left due to speculation about her salary. Gray earned £150,000 a year. But tabloids suggested that Gray, being a savvy careerist, sensed the imminent end of Starmer's era.
Barnier became France's shortest-lived prime minister. Macron appointed him head of the cabinet only in September. And now it's time to pack his bags.
We have massive structural unemployment. A large part of the population feels disconnected from society because they can't find work, as jobs in their fields have disappeared along with the factories. This is a deep crisis for us, firstly. Secondly, to finance these huge social costs, the state takes loans. Our national debt already exceeds 100% of GDP and continues to grow.
France hasn't seen such a rapid decline in over 60 years. The reasons lie in the economy. The new prime minister drafted a budget that shocked many. Here's how it happened.
The Barnier government presented the 2025 budget plan in October. To reduce the budget deficit by 2% of GDP, the cabinet cut spending by 40 billion euros compared to last year and proposed raising taxes on large corporations and wealthy French, which should bring another 20 billion euros to the treasury. The government promised that tax measures wouldn't affect the low-income population. Nevertheless, Barnier's proposed austerity measures could potentially impact sensitive areas for all population groups. In particular, the government proposed cutting healthcare spending by 3.8 billion euros and delaying pension inflation adjustments.
Instead of treating the economy, the prime minister prescribed a bitter potion. Barnier decided to fix the dire financial situation at the expense of the French themselves. He planned to reduce the budget deficit by 60 billion euros by raising taxes and significantly cutting government spending. He pushed the bill through without a parliamentary vote, further angering the public and politicians.
When you have a team with no majority in parliament, not even a proper minority, and they try to pass a budget bypassing parliament, political opponents, left and right, socialists or Le Pen, the two largest groups in parliament, said no. They stood up and said no. Neither this budget nor this government will stand. To prevent the budget from being implemented, they simply cut off the rotten branch on which the entire reserve bench, led by Mr. Barnier, was sitting. It was funny, comical, but in reality we're witnessing a vortex of a major systemic crisis in France.
As we can see, nothing new. Want to find finances? Take from ordinary people or businesses, cut social programs, and raise taxes. In the Baltics and Britain, all prime ministers lost their seats after this. They learned nothing from the bitter experiences of their colleagues.
France had to resort to an emergency budget-saving plan, partly because in June, the European Commission initiated penalty procedures against France and 6 other EU countries, including Italy and Belgium, due to excessive budget deficits. In France, the budget deficit level was estimated by the Ministry of the Interior to be approaching 6.1% of GDP, and the national debt had risen to 110% of GDP.
This year might very well oust Emmanuel Macron. The chair under the French leader is very shaky, Zelensky, if he decides to hold fair elections. Political turbulence is also present in Italy. Justin Trudeau in Canada might soon become a governor and the 51st state of the USA. Surely, we'll have more reasons to return to the time has expelled them cycle by the end of 2025. Goodbye.